So, to my right is Pam Koffler.
Hi, I'm Pam Koffler with Killer Films. My producing partner, Christine Vachon, and I started the company about 20 years ago. Our emphasis has always been very director-driven filmmaking. That's starting to evolve, not the director-driven part, but we don't restrict ourselves just to films for the cinema. We're interested and open to exploring television, in all the things that means, because we all know we don't just watch television on television sets, and other kinds of content that are united by the theme of just really, really great work, quality, original, fresh, and that's what we're doing.
To my left, Jason Berman.
Hi, my name is Jason. I am an independent film producer. I just actually started recently working with a company called Mandalay Pictures, but until next year, we'll still associate myself as being a fully independent producer as I'm finishing up projects that are in post-production. Hello. But for me, the types of films that I have really focused on over the last 5.5, 6 years, for the most part, have been first and second-time feature filmmakers, writers, and directors, and have worked very closely with the Sundance Institute in terms of getting projects that have gone through their writer and directors labs financed and produced. So I've worked a lot with other creative producers. Have really focused on films generally between the budget ranges of anywhere from $500,000 up to $5 million, and generally films that have been totally independently financed. And my focus has been on raising the financing for those pictures, and then helping to attach the actors to the scripts that I've gotten involved in, generally through the Sundance labs.
So, why don't you guys share? Is this really not working? This one's not working? I'm just nothing. Okay, good. All right, why don't you guys share that?
Hi, how are you? I'm Jennifer.
Good.
Nice to meet you.
So after those two very interesting independent bios, we go to a slightly less independent version of that. Mixed, that is true, but she's made them big, she's made them small, and she's made a lot of them, and you've heard of most of them. Jennifer Todd, tell us a little about yourself.
Thank you. Well, I'm a producer of 20 years, and I do have a mix of independent films and studio films. Right now, I made a transition over to run Ben Affleck and Matt Damon's company at Warner Brothers, so I am very much kind of in my studio mode. But before this, I have sort of I've made a bunch of high and low, and have a lot of opinions on the good and bad of both.
Good. And my name is Todd Harris, J.Todd Harris. I'm a longtime participant with the festival. I've known Mark and Brenda, who founded the festival, for many, many, many years. I went to business school with Mark, and I went to undergraduate school with Brenda. I produced Bottle Shock with them, and have made dozens of mostly independent films and a few very silly big films that are going to help put my kids through college. So, and hope to make more big silly films. Most recently, I've been focused on brands. I've started a company that is specifically focused on optioning and developing and packaging as much as possible branded intellectual properties. And when I say that, I mean I'm looking not unlike many other people, but hopefully in a slightly more organized way. I'm looking for Transformers, Legos, Sherlock Holmes, brands that people have heard of, sort of repolished, revarnished, and sort of commercially rendered. I've also done a little theater lately. I did a musical version of Heathers in New York earlier this year for about 5 months off Broadway. We hope to make that into a movie and then go back to Broadway. And then next year I'm working on a big Broadway musical called Dr. Zhivago that my wife is a co-lyricist on. So I'm trying to be a little more than the arm candy at the premiere. So anyway, so with that, I think we should, I think it would be interesting, maybe we'll even start with Jennifer. I've been in the business since 1986, and I didn't actually get a movie made until 1994. And, you know, I think that, you know, people, all of us on this panel, but especially Jennifer and myself, having been out in Hollywood, have seen a real curve, a real evolution as to how films are being pursued at a studio and independent level. And I'd love to get a little perspective from Jennifer about how she feels it's evolved in the 20 years you've been doing it.
I think it's terrible. I think it's a hard time for us right now because like you're talking about brands and because IP is so valuable at the studios, and even where I have our deal at Warner Brothers, they're making all, it's Superman and Batman and Aquaman. They're making Aquaman, and which was a joke in Entourage, and they're actually making the film, and so I think it's a very hard time. I'm very lucky that within that confines, I'll get to make sort of the artier, more interesting stuff because of who I work with, thank God. And there are a handful of filmmakers at the studio level. This is the time of year when you get those movies to come out, when you all of a sudden you get to see Birdman and interesting stuff because it's all of a sudden this is the time of year where they all come out. But I think it's really challenging. And then I think on the other hand, the independent films became very challenging because there's very little. The budgets are so are so low that they're challenging to make and they're challenging to be a producer and survive. I have so many friends who are such talented producers, independent producers, who have such a hard time making making ends meet because the budgets came down so low. We made Memento in 1999 for $4 million, and that felt very low at the time. And really, the only difference is you had to shoot on film then; it was pre-digital. But now, if I tried to make that film, I'd probably get under $1 million. For the same, 15 years later, I would definitely get less money. So I think, not to be so negative, but I do think it's a very challenging time. And I think hopefully until they'll figure out the system of home delivery system of independent, where there's a bigger pay and there's some kind of profits to be had. Hopefully that will change the future.
Well,
Can I just
yeah,
jump in with?
please.
I agree with everything Jennifer's saying, but because I have to remain optimistic, or else I, would crawl under my bed and not go to my office every day. I think the good news, and I'm seeing it a lot in sort of the new generation of, and we stop calling them filmmakers so much as storytellers or content makers. There's so many places for your stuff to be seen. And so many places you can just make stuff and get it seen that maybe will, and that's of course not a sustainable lifestyle, but if you're new to it and you want a future in storytelling, things can happen. So I recently heard about some young filmmakers who made an episodic piece, put it on Vimeo, and it caught on because it was really great, and the guys at Vimeo noticed it and approached them to actually make the series for real money. Like not lots of money, but someone else was paying for it besides them. And I think that's just a little microcosm of the way you can be entrepreneurial about being a storyteller outside of sort of the established star-driven, bigger concept, bigger movie mode, which of course you have to graduate into. So I think that's sort of a little bit of good news. Maybe?
Sure.
First of all, I want to say that I loved Ben in Gone Girl. He was great. Thank you.
He was great. I didn't make that one movie.
I know, but still, loved it. I think that what you're going to hear a lot during the course of the day is that storytelling, I think, and we all think, has changed shape. And that's why you're seeing so many people gravitate to television. Because television's, I'm embarrassed to say I grew up, there were 3 channels, there was 2, 4, 5, 7, 9, and 11, and Channel 13, if you had the right antenna. So now it's crazy, and the television world is so fragmented that, and every, literally hundreds of state channels, but, especially like the top 30 or 40 all have their own brand, and there's just so many opportunities in television. And to off of what Pam just said, I think there's a lot of opportunities in online, and I know many people who have gigs large and small, making things for online. And I was recently flipping through somewhere, and I was watching something on Vimeo, and a ad came up for a new series on Vimeo only. So everything, you're actually going to see Dropbox being as a channel, I think, maybe. But Jason, tell us a little bit about how you think things have changed a little bit.
Well, I mean, the one thing I would say is I do think that there, at least on the independent film community, that there is actually a good amount of equity that's out in the industry now in terms of financing your projects. I will say that over the last 5, 6 years since I've been actively doing this, that the equity has gotten smarter in terms of what they're looking to invest in and the types of structures that they're looking to get involved in. They're starting to work with agents and lawyers that help navigate the space a little bit more and have a better understanding in terms of how setting up a financing structure can best be put together so you can see your return back. So I've definitely, I mean, for me, in terms of the projects that I've put together over the last 2-3 years, if I find something that I've generally been really passionate about, finding finding investors for it hasn't been an issue. But definitely we're put forward with a lot more questions now in terms of how we're setting our structures up and making sure that we're making a film at the right value level. And again, the movies that I've generally been doing have been under $5 million. So I'm not setting the bar in a place that's really tough for me to get films accomplished, but I do have to get a certain level of actor and accomplish a certain level of international pre-sales, which hopefully, if you guys don't know, we can probably talk a little bit about as well, to be able to get those movies financed in the $5 million and under budget range.
I would like to ask you, because I think it's a question, certainly it's an ongoing question for me, and I solve it sometimes and I don't always solve it, but I'm sure people here are interested in who are these people with money and why do they do this?
Mm-hmm. I mean, that's a great question. The people, it's interesting. The way that I produced a movie, the first film I produced was at Sundance in 2010, and we made it in 2009. It was called The Dry Land. And it was a movie that we made for a little bit under $1 million, and it was it premiered in competition at Sundance. And literally, since that point in 2010, I've produced 15 feature films up until now, and have helped raise money for, I would say, about 90% of those. The investors that I actually started meeting to raise equity for those films began at film festivals. And the first investor that I met, and they were film festivals generally outside of Sundance and outside of major top film festivals, but the first film festival that I met an investor at was at the Dallas International Film Festival. And that investor had seen The Dry Land and was interested in financing that filmmaker's next movie. And other people that were involved in both films. And so from there, it just started to build up traction. We were getting introduced to more and more people who had an interest in investing in art, in films, keeping, again, the budgets at a pretty moderate level, so at that time, under $1 million. And so that's how we were able to start building up traction in terms of putting these films together, and investors would introduce us to other people that had an interest. And generally it was, high net worth individuals who had an interest in the arts, and I think feature films that also conveyed a message. Every film that I've ever raised financing for privately, the investors who have gotten involved have had some commonality or relatability to the story that we're finding. And so I've now, accumulated over the last 5 or 6 years, 10 different investors that I've worked with that I know the types of things that they're interested in, the types of stories that they're interested in, maybe based upon their backgrounds of the way they grew up, or certain things that they can relate to. And so there's certain stories that I know will resonate with some more than others, and take them to those individuals.
So it's a little discouraging in one sense, because it sounds like they're patrons, like patrons of the arts. I know they've become more sophisticated lately, and I'm glad that they have, because if people keep investing and losing money, then they won't come back. I also understand, having made a wine movie and a lacrosse movie and gotten all the investment from the wine community and the lacrosse community, I understand that.
But I would say it's the one thing I will say that I feel like I have done a good job at, and the reason I've been able to keep the investor base that I've worked with for the last 5, 6 years, is that I've been very conscious about the budgets that I'm making these films for. And again, I haven't made large fees on the movies that I've done. The actors generally that I've worked with have all made scale. And I've worked with some well-known actors that have literally been willing to work for $1,500 a week. So I've kept the budgets very conservative for the amount, for the types of films that I've done, and have been able to find those scripts, and I will say a lot of them through having kind of found filmmakers coming out of different labs programs, whether they're Film Independent or Sundance or IFP, or projects that have been developed at the San Francisco Film Society and with the support of that organization. And they're scripts that really offer offer their material that are well written and have really unique characters in them. And so we go and find actors actors for these projects where we're offering them to do something that they haven't done before. And then we figure out how to stretch the dollar as much as we can.
I'm a big believer in knowing who your market is. I mean, I don't want to. It can be discouraging if all you think about is marketing and what the built-in audience is, because if that was the criteria, you'd have no Alexander Payne, you'd have no Steven Soderbergh, you'd have no Coen Brothers, you'd have no well, maybe you'd have Robert Rodriguez. I don't know, but. I think that, but I do believe that more and more we have to think about who is going to see our film and be able to tell the people who are investing why this film distinguishes itself and what group of people are going to be interested in seeing it. Pam's made so many interesting, really, if you don't know Killer Films, based out of New York, Christine and Pam have made dozens of iconic independent films. And so much of that is filmmaker driven, but yet now, are you more sensitive now before you take something on about who the audience is going to be, or is it if you have a great filmmaker, that's enough?
I think for us, it's definitely who the audience is, but we don't tend to. And I don't know why this is. We don't tend to have a lot of movies that have one core thing about them, whether like wine or lacrosse or something like that. Although we do right now, and it's been interesting to see in a way how easy that film was to finance. Not at a lot of money. It's a film called Still Alice, which is coming out, and it's based on a book, which is one thing already. It was a beloved self-published book about early onset Alzheimer's. And when that script first came to me, I thought, well, that's going to get made. That's a real happy topic. And who's going to want to go see a movie about a wonderful, self-possessed woman with a beautiful family, grown children, who at 50 discovers she has early onset Alzheimer's, and it just goes down from there. But at its core, the movie has a message that I think is very universal. And it also has, it's about something that a lot of people are struggling with. And so I had a suspicion that there really was a pretty big core audience between the book and the community of, Americans and internationally who are dealing with a serious illness and caring for people who have it. So we got the movie financed very, very modestly, despite Julianne Moore, Alec Baldwin, Kristen Stewart, and Kate Bosworth, and filmmakers who had made 2 films that were really good. So all that was, in the positive box. In the negative box is it's a small drama about a tough subject, but there is an audience for it, not just because it's an interesting story, but there is a specific topic that we're now seeing as we're starting to go into the marketplace between the Alzheimer's Association of America, the Lovers of the Book, international chapters of caregivers. There's like a lot of people who are already lining up to see the movie. Then maybe if it's perceived to be a really good movie, which I think it will be, those of us who just love to go see a good movie with a fantastic central performance will go see it. So that was a film that sort of on the face of it I was a little scared of, but the more I thought about it and the more I realized how it could come together, the more I realized that at the right number, which was not a big number, but it was a number we could make the film for, under $5 million is all I'll say. It could happen, and in fact, we could have financed that film in more than one way, which is the sign of a movie that does have that kind of potential. If everyone's saying no to you over and over and over, you probably need to look at your whole package and figure out what's the wrong piece here, and how do I fix it so that someone says yes.
I want to hand it over to Jennifer and grind our gears just a little bit. So we're talking about an under $5 million movie with Julianne Moore that has to be, actually, it's exciting for Pam on that, because there were multiple ways that could get financed, which meant it was probably a good idea. So, but you have to convince Warner Brothers to make a movie, or a studio generally to make a movie. So that must be a whole different set of considerations. Obviously, it's when you've got Matt or Ben in a movie, that's one thing. But a lot of your projects are movies they're producing.
Sure.
So you've got what goes into your process. I mean, it must be a little more bureaucratic and a little more political, and the right executive and the right budget and the right subject. But what goes into convincing when you decide to bring a movie to the studio?
Well, they are, and they're the same, in some ways, it's the same dilemma. There's always there's short list of names that get you what you need, and each studio has a slightly different list, of for some reason, when they wake up on a Monday, who they'll make a movie with and who they won't. I think that if you're not bringing in something that's a cartoon, based on some incredibly successful IP, you're already at a disadvantage, but depending on the filmmaker or the talent that you have involved, you can kind of begrudgingly get that in there. I have a film I'm working on now that Jay Roach is attached to direct, and it's just something that we're producing at the studio. It's called The Trade. It's based on a true story about these Yankees that wife swapped in the 70s, and it's a very good script kind of about sexual politics of the 70s, against the backdrop of baseball. And it's, we're trying to cast it now, and it's at Warner Brothers, and they'll give us under a certain number to make it.
What's the tone?
It's fun. I mean, it's let's see. It's sort of a dramedy. It's got great sort of impactful moments, but it has some great lightness to it too. It's very fun. But I don't know that I'll be able to get one of the 4 names on the list, to get it there. And I think that's where you have in that way you have less freedom than you have in independent film, because in independent film you can kind of go back and say, all right, well, if I can't make it for 4 with this guy, maybe I'll make it for 2 with this cast, or in that way you can kind of rejigger it, and the studios very much have a box that you have to fill.
Just want to say that I went to college with Jay Roach. Now, Jay Roach directed the Austin Powers films.
Well, that's how I met him. He was my teacher.
Right.
He was my professor at SC, which just goes to show you that you're older than me.
Thank you for reminding me.
Yes, he taught my motion picture camera class at SC.
So-
'Cause he stayed for. Well, did you go to Stanford? Or
I
you
went to Stanford undergrad.
Okay, yeah,
so-
and then he went to SC.
And Jay Roach, who's
That's how I knew it. That's
essentially became anointed a comedy genius
Yeah.
15 years ago.
Well, the first
20
one-
years ago?
Yeah, almost 20. Yeah.
So Jay Roach, when I knew him in college, and kind of when I met him again in LA, the quietest, the most humble, the least Hollywood prick of anybody you could possibly want to meet. He's the nicest.
He's the greatest guy.
The nicest guy, and not basically. And by the way, when you're just talking to him, not a laugh riot.
Well, that doesn't mean you can't, that means
funny.
you don't
I
ever
can't
be,
direct
or
funny.
understand funny. Sometimes, it's a different beast of people who need to be funny than people who understand funny.
No,
So, Jennifer, I have a question about that script, which sounds great, by
Yes,
the way.
sure.
Could you, if you can't get those 4 actors in each category that the studio will make it with, is there a path where you could say, give it back to me, and I'm going to go try to get it made?
With killer films.
Yes, yes, there are, yes, but the problem is whether they'll let me have it back.
Right. So that's about turnaround.
Well,
and they
Warner's in
own it.
particular is very sensitive to that because of, they all have histories of Home Alone, and this one is Home Alone and Slumdog Millionaire, and you kind of go through the list of things they've given up, so.
That went on to become huge successes.
For
in
other people, yeah. So
ways.
that's the only problem, is once you've let a studio in, and also, it's been there for a while because Matt and Ben originally set it up as something for themselves to act in, and then now they've aged out. But, so I shudder to think what the turnaround costs are on it at this point, but yes, but it would be possible. And hopefully, and I'm sure at some point I'd try if I can't get it made.
By the way, in great stories about studios letting things go, I understand that Fox let Blindside go because it was Julia Roberts or nothing for the
Right.
Blind Side, and then Warner Brothers and our friends at
Alcon.
said Sandra Bullock will do, and it did really quite well. So there's every studio has a range of horror stories about movies they said, we won't make this, and somebody else went on to make $250 million.
Sure, and Fox made the Lucas marketing deal, so they'll always have made the worst deal of anybody in history, right? They gave him back the marketing of his film, so.
That's true.
And the other, to kind of add to the studio turnaround side, there are some, and I'm not going to use names, but there are some independent divisions of some of the major studios that are now looking for, independent financiers and producers to come in and produce those films outside of the studio system, and then they'll come in and pick them up or do what's known as a negative pickup later on, therefore taking it outside and not having to utilize their infrastructure, nor have to pay their rates, that they may have that are precedential with actors and or different vendors. And so there's a couple of those independent divisions at some of the studios that are starting to do that a lot now to get product made, and it's also created a good opportunity for independent producers and financiers to get involved in maybe some larger budget projects that have a higher pedigree of talent that may already have been attached, or writers, directors that already have been involved in those projects. And so there's a couple of those that I've gotten involved in over the last year, and they're actually a lot, they're a lot of fun to do. It's definitely an interesting process negotiating with the studios, because you have to negotiate the different costs and the distribution fees up front. But I think we'll probably see more and more of that being done now.
Jason's comment reminds me, or brings to mind the subject of independent film distribution, because as we've all, everybody up here pretty much has seen, and you as film goers and film aficionados have seen the rise and fall of independent film distribution companies. Started back to Miramax and Sony Classics, which is really the one company in addition to Searchlight, but Sony Classics has really stuck to their knitting as a distribution company. What they'll pay, what their style of movie is. Sony Classics really has it dialed in, and something like Crouching Tiger is a complete aberration for Sony Classics, and Searchlight has done a very good job over the last several years, but then there was this period of time where Paramount Classics bubbled up with John Lesher, and Warner Independent bubbled up with Mark Gill, thank you, and then of course those two places shuttered down, and everybody thought the independent distribution world was contracting, and now in the last couple of years, things like A24 and I don't know if which one? Radius is breaking the mold. I thought we might have Dan here today, but Dan from Radius is here, and they're the companies that release things like Arbitrage and Spring Breakers and do movies basically day and date, or they give them special VOD releases, then small theatrical releases. So the whole landscape of distribution is shifting, and so back to Pam, when you take on a film, because maybe you do or don't know this, U.S. distribution is almost always, with an independent film, the last component. Mm-hmm. So when you take on a film, are you thinking about who's going to distribute that film when you make it?
Yeah, I mean, we think about, just the character and the flavor of the film, if it's perfectly executed, who do we think might be a U.S. distributor, but almost more importantly, we try to make the film for an amount of money that doesn't rely too heavily on money from that sale, because the U.S. sale of any independent film has just gone down and down and down over the years, which means, and the least predictable. So if you're not going to pre-sell your movie, which many of our films just aren't suitable for that because they're so execution dependent, you just have to leave the piece of your upside to be as little for that part, because you have to then get into a pretty good festival. You don't know what else you're going to be competing with. It's sort of definitely a jungle for that. So that's what our strategy has been, and it sort of ties into the theme of making anything these days, is really understanding what the market will bear for the story you're telling and the elements of your story.
Let me ask Jennifer, when you made Memento, did you have U.S. distribution?
We did not. We only had foreign when we made it. And we tried to sell domestic distribution and no one would buy the film.
Why?
They didn't find it commercial enough. And so the guys who financed the film,
New market?
New Market, they self-distributed the film. They hired Bob Burney, who at the time was a distribution consultant. He had helped another company on a Todd Salon's movie called Happiness that was having distribution issues because of its content. And so they hired Bob, and they gave him a small amount of money just to distribute the film under New Market Films.
What year was it released again?
It was 2000.
And that announced the arrival of director.
Yeah, Chris Nolan did okay from it, and actually the film did really well. I mean, it was such an interesting movie because we made it for the $4 million. New Market financed it. Some it had come in on the international, and so they had done the pre-sale. So New Market was, I think, probably down about $1 million at that point. I don't know exactly, but they were. Carrie Ann Moss was coming off The Matrix and had helped us with sort of the international on it, and so the pre-sales have been well, and then. We had that thing, we didn't take the film, our original plan wasn't to take the film to festivals. We did a screening the Friday night before the Oscars, and I watched it in a room with Harvey Weinstein, who passed to my face. I have the apology letter for it. And then and all around town, we had screenings with other people watching the film, and everyone, I think, just thought it was, Harvey, to his credit, said, that guy's a really talented filmmaker. We should do something else with him. I just don't think this film is the one.
Now, let me ask you this. You read the script early on. Mm-hmm. Did you know what the hell was going on?
I did. I always say it took me 3 tries. It read like stereo instructions. And I think that when I first thought, I actually did think at some point it was going to stop and go forward. So I kept taking notes. But it was a fun movie to make because it was so challenging. And in truth, I wasn't convinced it was a commercial film. It was interesting. So then what happened is they self-distributed the film, and then we did the festivals. And then what happened is, thank God, the movie got sort of stunning reviews.
You had commercial distribution and then did the festivals?
No. I'm saying the guys decided to self-distribute.
Right,
so
okay.
because they were self-distributing, then we decided to do the festivals, and we went to Venice, Toronto, Sundance, and the movie started getting very good reviews.
What had you seen of Chris's that convinced you to do that?
I had seen this short film he had done called Following that he had made, and it's a full-length film, black and white, which is a very smart film. He made for almost no money about a guy who follows people for fun, and one day someone starts to follow him, and I thought it was very interesting. It's out now. Everything that Chris has ever
Right.
is on a special edition Blu-ray, I'm sure.
Let me ask you, how many people here have seen Inception? How many can tell me what the hell it's about? All right, this is the thing with Chris, right?
Well, you'll have to see Interstellar, and then,
Oh, great.
then you can really have a conversation. So, but yeah, it was obviously that was a crazy ride, and it ended up making $25 million domestic. So.
Let me throw up a new subject for people, and I'll start with Jason. I'm sure people here are interested in how you discover new voices, directors' voices, writers' voices. How do things ever get to your desk, and what makes you decide to move on them?
Well, let's say this. I mean, I went to film school at USC, I guess, along with both.
I know somebody else
both
who's younger than me. Thank you.
Another person. I also now teach at USC. You did teach at USC, didn't
I
you?
taught a class.
You taught a class, okay. I think it was while I was there. No, I'm really dating you. Sorry.
I think I'm older than him, but you're older than me.
Right.
That's right.
Methuselah here on the mic, going forward.
Well, let me say this. I mean, by the relationships that I formed with my classmates at USC. I mean, I think that's one of the best things about going to film school is the people that you kind of go to film school with are the ones that you grow up in the business with and you continue to work with over and over again. I will. In addition to that, I'll also say that I have, gotten involved as just an advisor at IFP, Film Independent, and Sundance, and those are great nonprofit organizations that curate films through their labs programs. So by doing that as well, I have built a relationship with the people who run those programs, and so if they find something that comes through that's really interesting, they'll that they think that I may be right for as a producer and can add to it, they'll recommend it to me, and I know they do that with with you guys at Killer Films a lot as well. And then, I mean, I now teach at USC, and so that's another great way of building relationships with filmmakers when they're really young.
Are film screenplay competitions relevant to you?
Not, no, that not, they have not fully been relevant to me. I would say that, and that's just because I have, between where I'm getting material from, whether it's from the independent groups at the agencies or my own relationships or through the different nonprofits that I've gotten involved in, that keeps me so consumed that I haven't really relied on the film, the different screenplay competitions. But I know that I have colleagues of mine that definitely do. So I think it's just a matter of where I've kind of built my home, my base for material.
Let me ask, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, no, and then in regards to when I'm getting involved in something, for me, I think, and it kind of comes through with a lot of the films that I've done, there's generally a coming-of-age component to it, or or there's a character that has learned from some aspect of what's happened through the story to then hopefully become, better and inspire other people to be better. So that theme has definitely been prevalent in a lot of the films that I've gotten involved in over the last 5 years.
Let me ask Pam, how does somebody get a project to Killer Films?
Well, we have a policy of, no unsolicited manuscripts because we would never get a thing done if we attempted to cover them all. And you also, it's just not, it's not a great way for us to find our material just over the transom. How do you get a script to us? Having an agent or a lawyer whom we know and trust, has decent taste, and knows what we are doing and what we're looking for is a great way. We all come to these festivals and we meet a lot of the filmmakers, we watch their films, we look at shorts, and if the work is good, you'll come up to us and say, hey, I made that film, and if we've seen it and like it, there's a connection made, and that kind of cuts through the gazillion emails and submissions. We have just 4 people in our company, me, Christine, David, who's our development guy, and our assistant, who also, we welcome his opinion about scripts that he likes and films that he's seen and filmmakers he thinks we should know. So between the 4 of us and all of our kind of antenna, and the agency relationships we have, whom we trust not to waste our time with a script that we'd never in a million years make, respond to, or know how to approach. I mean, we wouldn't have gotten Interstellar sent to our office because I wouldn't know how to begin with a movie like that. But the kinds of movies we make, that's kind of what it begets. And every now and then we'll make something that's a little different, and then we kind of beget those kind of projects. So, like that.
I was also going to say, I think one of the other ways that I've definitely seen films, and you mentioned it, is when I'm at Sundance, generally, which I go every year, I will definitely try to go to 1 or 2 of the different shorts, programs. And sometimes you see something that's incredible, and you go and you introduce yourself to the filmmaker afterwards. So definitely shorts programs are a way that seeing material is good.
I mean, they're a drag to produce, but they're great for directors. Let me ask Jennifer. So, now that you're at Pearl Street, it's a whole different lens through which you look at material than when you were more independent.
Sure,
Right?
absolutely.
So obviously things come from agents and, things like that, but how else does something fresh and original show up in your door?
Well, I have the same policies, Pam, basically, as far as agents and people you try. It's the only way you could actually read the material. But it's interesting working for the guys in that I see a lot of producers like passion projects, because a lot of times people are like, this is a hard story to tell, but I could get it told if I got one of your guys in the film or attached to the film. And so, I'm very respectful of anyone who tries to bring material, because I, for many years, was on that side too of trying, of going to that. So I try to read everything quickly, try to give an answer. But our boxes, our stuff is kind of smart. Our look is pretty narrow,
Right.
kind of.
It's a small target.
It's a small target because it's, Matt hasn't directed yet. Ben obviously is a director and an actor. We're kind of looking for things. They both write still too, but they both made so many movies. There was it's very interesting science fiction partial book sold this week called Dark Matter. Sony bought it for a lot of money, for I think 1.5, and it came through our office. We really liked it, but it had similarities to by the way, I'm not sure I could have gotten that sold for that money, but similarities to the Adjustment Bureau. So then you're always like, oh, well, I have that thing. The guys have made so many movies that there's a lot of territory that's just gone, real estate that's just
Right.
gone due to things that have already been covered by them. And then I always say we're always looking for material that feels elevated. You know, sometimes you read a lot, sometimes I'll read something very good, but it feels very on genre, like it's a very just good action movie or something like that, and that's not quite what we want to do. We always want to look for something that feels
Distinguished.
a little more distinguished. It has something special to it. It has a message to it. You know, a lot of our stuff is, for me, it's a lot of it about theme. You know, really more, what are you trying to say about the movie? What are you trying to conclude, and where are you trying to lead people? It's sort of almost more interesting, more important than anything else.
Is the company just you, them, and many other people? Or?
I have, it's very much like yours. I have two people. I have a creative executive and a VP and an assistant. So it's very small too, considering, you know, I'm sure like you know, sort of deluged with material, especially books. The
Yeah.
books are what kill me.
But this is a really interesting thing to note. I remember back in the dark ages of the covered wagon, remember when I used to take scripts on airplanes, and I used to take a canvas bag with 8 scripts. That's why I have scoliosis, and that's why my back is. But no, I used to carry like 10 scripts in a bag, as if I was going to read 10 of them on a plane. But I mean, I would carry them around as like a badge of honor. Look how hard I'm working. Look at all these scripts I'm reading. But the truth is that what I feel has, one of the things that's happened, not just in the film business, but in any business, I feel, in the last 10 or 15 years, is that everybody's attention, there's just more data. There's just a lot of stuff to process and consume. And you know, before I'll read a script, I really have to, you know, it really has to be from somebody who I totally trust, or somebody has to have read it before me that can tell me why this is a really compelling thing to read.
Sure, the worst thing anyone can say to you is like, can you do me a favor? I want you to, you know, it's like, it's sort of the worst favor to ask of me. It's like,
But by the way, there was an extremely funny, was it an article or a YouTube of no, I will not read
Right,
your
right.
script.
Yes, exactly.
It was very inside baseball, but it was pretty damn funny. So
who wrote that?
who wrote it? Oh, right. No, I will not read your script.
Right.
Yeah, it was side-splittingly funny and sad. But I would say is that everyone's time is very compressed, and I hate to say this because so many artists are good artists, and they're not great self-marketers, and it's a drag. I once had a girlfriend who was a spectacular photographer, but she couldn't sell a glass of water to a guy dying of thirst in the desert. And she would never promote her photographs. And she didn't want to, and she didn't know why she had to. She just wanted to take great photographs, and she did. Fortunately, we went out for a while, and I sold some of them. But
Well, I think that's true. I mean, some of the best writers I know are not the best pitchers.
But I think when you're not, you know, Steve Zalian doesn't really have to pitch anymore, and Richard LaGrave, I mean, everybody has to pitch, but great writers get the benefit of the doubt, and people will read anything that comes out of a once or a current great writer. When you're new and you're trying to you might have an audience with somebody for 30 seconds or a minute, and that's why they call it the elevator pitch, and it's so debasing. But I mean, can you interest somebody in something that you've got in a short span of time, in a few sentences in an email? I get 3 or 4 queries. I must be on some list. I get these email queries every day, and I can't.
Delete them.
I delete them. I just don't look at them. I can't. So, but how, you know, and I'll admit that I have occasionally looked at 1 or 2 of them and go, oh, that's an interesting idea. And then you get the script, and you're usually sorry you asked for it. But occasionally there are good ideas out there. So even those people, you know, even if only 1 in 50 people who are getting those read those, I'm just saying that you need to be able to convey your point concisely. Maybe now that we've warmed up here, we could open it up to a few questions if anybody would like to do that, or we can continue to ramble, which we've done so far so nicely.
So I've written a script based on the music of a band called the Polyphonic Spree, with the band's blessing, and they're behind it. The band is also, with their last album, financed it solely through Kickstarter. And you've heard their music. They've been in Apple commercials, but they also have this catalog that's pretty huge, and they'll have this very strong background of fans, including John C. Reilly and Zach Braff, who have said they're interested in doing it with us if we can get some financing. But there's this stigma attached to getting financing for a film like this via Kickstarter, not only from some of the people we've talked to, but from the band, because it becomes like, well, how many times are we going to go to the well and ask our fans to pay for our work? And something like this, probably, because it's an animated feature, will need more than we can even generate.
It's animated?
Yes, and we have animators that have developed a 5-minute spec film of it at this point. So, it's like, I'm kind of on the fence of where I should go with this at this point. Do we want to jump into that? Because if we jump into this funding through the fans and through a Kickstarter model, I feel like we're going to block out a lot of other potential from that.
I want to turn this over to my fellow panelists, but I do think it might be worth a little discussion on Kickstarter or Indiegogo when we get a chance. And there's a new website called Slated, which is more of an exchange between bona fide producers and bona fide financiers, and they are actually getting a broker-dealer license and actually getting into the business of intermediating the transactions and the investments. So I do think Kickstarter. I pass on 99% of the ones I see. Occasionally, someone will make a special appeal to me, and I'll throw in $25 to be a good egg. But let me just ask you, and then see who has some thoughts on it. Do you have a projected budget?
We can get it done conservatively for under $1 million. The more talent we attach to it, that's probably going to increase the.
What kind of animation is that going to be?
Right now, it's hand-drawn, layered physical animation. I would like to do more CGI, just because of time, money, and flow. Some of the characters with that style of animation that we're using now kind of are a little bit flat and choppy. So, we need some direction in that. But the animators we're working with, the project's big enough that they're interested in utilizing other animators' talents to create some of the scenes. Each scene is based, or each piece of the story is driven by one of the songs, and the script kind of flows through with each of the songs. So we have the opportunity to really get some other talent attached to it.
Jason?
I mean, I'll tell you, so my experience with Kickstarter has so far been on 3 short films that I've gotten involved in for colleagues of mine that have graduated in 2006 and have really kind of refined their craft and are now have some scripts that are out there, and they want to be able to do something so they can convince other producers to allow them to direct. So I've been involved in executive producing those short films and putting them up on Kickstarter, and we've raised anywhere from $30,000 to $75,000. This actually just came up in a conversation that I was having a couple days ago with an investor that I'm working with on a $7.6 million film that is a slave rebellion story that we're going to be shooting down most likely in Georgia. And we are in the process of closing the equity on that movie, and the idea came up about utilizing Kickstarter. And there's going to be some really well-known names that are a part of this cast. And the thing that we talked about was, well, when we have the $6 million, or let's say the $6.5 million locked in, and we have to get that extra $1 million into the budget, and we haven't been able to raise it through private equity or bank financing, maybe doing a Kickstarter campaign. And being able to go out and say, obviously, here's a story that's an important story to tell. We've raised, let's say 80 to 90% of the budget in private equity, and now go do a Kickstarter. And I would go about getting the permission of all of the actors that were going to be in the film to do that. And I think that, and their representatives. And I would say that I I probably would be able to convince for a yes, knowing with the representatives knowing that I had most of the financing locked and committed for the film. Where I would be hesitant, for me as a producer, and I'm not saying that this won't change over the next couple of years, is if I had no money in the bank account and I was going out and starting to raise financing with well-known names attached to a project and starting to try to build the financing from the bottom up utilizing Kickstarter. I think I would get a lot of pushback from the representatives and from the actors of the level that we're dealing with on this project to do it that way. But I think doing it the other way that I just mentioned to you, I think I could probably push that through. So that's the only way that I can really comment on what you're talking about.
great.
I mean, just to elaborate on that thought, we had a very similar situation on a film recently where we were just that $100,000 away from having exactly the right amount of time to shoot, for being able to have enough money to hire a real composer, all those things that the movie could have lived and existed without it, but would be better with it. So I thought, that's a perfect reason to do a Kickstarter campaign. And I did call all the agents, and they were like, no. Our actors are not comfortable with money coming into a project that is, essentially a commercial enterprise with no return. There's no return on that money. And I let it go, but I've been thinking a lot about it, that's the delicate line
Right.
with crowdfunding. So I'm sensitive to your concern about that. I mean, it sounds like your project sort of has enough heft and talent and fan base that there just must be that super fan out there.
Right.
That will be that first drop of money that will then lead you to say, I have X percentage of my budget, I just need this, and really develop a business plan.
I think I agree with that Uber fan type of idea, and you're up against it because these guys feel like they've milked Kickstarter a little bit. I had a lovely project, which is a little offbeat, but it's the perfect movie for a Disney or Nickelodeon girl to begin her transition into slightly, more grown-up fare without going crazy. And I have an actress interested who's got 15 million Facebook followers and 6 million Twitter followers, and to me that is an Indiegogo Kickstarter wet dream to start with that kind of a fan base. But her representatives were highly unsupportive of her doing anything, and we met with her a couple of times because without her, doing a howdy y'all, this is so-and-so from so-and-so, and this is my movie, and it's going to be really great, and I can't wait to do it, and I want you all to be a part of it. Without that, the conversation was over. So, more questions? Yes, you're in the back, okay. Oh, we have a microphone. It's coming to you.
I'm curious about it. I agree with Jennifer that it's really scary right now because I see superheroes and then micro budget and nothing in the middle. And I feel like a lot of my favorite movies are the ones in the middle.
Me too.
And so I was curious because I'm about to step into potentially working on a project that might be in the middle more than it couldn't be made for 4 or 5. And so I'm curious about foreign because it seems as if that seems like maybe a hopeful spot, in terms of pre-sales or in terms of, return on the other side. And so I'm curious about your projects. How much has foreign, how much has European foreign versus, Asian foreign markets, has that been part of your, pre-selling, part of your return? And how much has the foreign market affected your work? And also, is there hope for film that is in the mid-range, that does have depth, outside the U.S. market?
Jen?
Well, I think these guys have been doing it more lately, but I think, in my experience, the foreign sales have been, it's just entirely, it's been different movie to movie because of subject matter and value. of the actors that were in it. You know, I've had ones that are, some of my smaller films were comedies and had very little, you know, unfortunately very little European or international value, and then sometimes you get lucky with a subject matter or a piece of talent and sometimes it's weird, sometimes a piece of talent will be worth a lot in one territory. I don't know if you've had that experience where all of a sudden you have one actor who somehow is more valuable in Germany or something, and so that's been my experience in the past, but what about you guys?
I think I echo what Jennifer said, although if I had to make a blanket rule, I think foreign is less and less a reliable source of, you know, building your budget. You know, kind of goes to what I said in the very beginning is, you know, the domestic value of your movie has to be sort of, it's so risky and it's so capricious that your entire budget should be sort of about what your foreign value is, maybe a little bit more, and because equity will take a little bit of a risk on the U.S. So I don't see foreign being sort of the great hope of this mid-range movie. I don't know what is. I mean, I think that those stories are more frequently being explored in television series, in like the way Amazon and Netflix are creating these really long-form novelistic works that are fantastic, and you can download them all at once, and it's just changing. I mean, I don't know if it will come back around when we sort out this crazy how to monetize all the ways you can watch stuff seemingly easily for free on the internet. Maybe it'll swing back around, but I'm not sure that, you know, that middle range, you know, $10 to $20 million, smart, polished, complex, told on a very wide palette adult movie that is my absolute favorite thing to see. I don't know when if and when they're coming back.
Jason.
Yeah, I mean, I think the entire the foreign marketplace is so hit or miss. There were two films this past year that we did kind of utilizing foreign pre-sales, and one worked out really, really well, and that was a film that we did with Richard Gere, and it worked. It was great, and then the other one didn't work out as well, and the numbers that we had projected from the foreign sales companies, what they were able to bring in, were way below what their takes were, and way below what their asks were. So it's in my opinion, it's a completely hit or miss market in the foreign sales space. And to keep in mind that those movies were, you know, between $5 and $8 million. They weren't the $10 to $20 million pictures.
But I would still, I mean, you know, I think everybody up here will agree that you can't disregard the foreign.
Yeah,
yeah, and I think that you should find affiliate with a strong company and have them evaluate your cast and have them give you estimates.
Right.
And then and you know, those estimates, some of those are going to be like eventually sales, but only a few of them are going to be pre-sales, and that's kind of what you need to get these things going.
Yeah, I mean, this under $6 million Richard Gere film that I'm referring to, the reason that was able to come together was because of the foreign pre-sales. If we didn't have those foreign pre-sales and had them, you know, set up prior to shooting, that movie probably would not have been financed. So it still is a very, very useful tool in terms of getting financing set up.
And just for the uninitiated, you know, what we're talking about is, you know, 3 times a year or 4 times a year there'll be film markets. One just concluded in Santa Monica, the American Film Market. There's one in Berlin in February. There's one in Cannes in May, and then Toronto has become a market in September. These are times when the entire film distribution and the film buying communities come together. The filmmakers and the film buyers come together, and people will buy, like, you know, just like we have Warner Brothers, Paramount, Disney. You know, Germany's got Telemunchen, Telepool, you know, all these other companies, and they all come together to buy films to fill their screens, large and small, and so if Germany has been the film financing hoe for many years, and so because it's a big economy and its tastes aren't wildly different than American tastes. It ebbs and flows. There was a time when Japan was a big pre-buyer. Now, Russia, until Putin went all Putin on us, it was a pretty big buyer. Certain territories are good for buyers. And when Europe went in the toilet, Spain, which used to be a good buyer, Italy, which used to be a good buyer, became less. So what you do is you pre-sell the rights to your movie, and then you take that contract, if it's hopefully bankable, to a bank, and they loan you 80 or 90% of that buy, so you can make your movie.
And then on top of that, you then, for a film's budget, you hopefully are shooting in a tax incentive state, so hopefully you can get 20 to 30% back from the state. And then when Pam's talking about how much you're going to have against North America or against your domestic rights, generally on these lower budget films, you're keeping the US and sometimes maybe even Canada open to be able to sell after you're finished and completed the film. And so, of course, for us, and when we're putting these films together, we want to keep the amount against North America as small as possible. So having more foreign pre-sales helps us accomplish that.
And there was a glorious time in the 80s before all of us were up to ramming speed, where films were actually being entirely financed by foreign sales. You could finance the entire movie by foreign sales, and everything you made in the U.S. and maybe a couple other territories was gravy.
And you guys are probably familiar with Lionsgate. Lionsgate has done really well, obviously, with the Hunger Games and with their step-up films. Even those films, to this day, with the increasing budgets of those particular movies, because they've done so well, I think they may have been able to accomplish the financing of those pictures completely by the foreign rights in terms of how they're set up.
But those go-go days are over, and if you want to know what sells foreign, it's very logical. It's action, because a car chase is a car chase in any language. And fights are fights, and guns are guns. That's why you see a stupid freaking gun in like 3 out of 4 foreign posters being pre-sold. It's either a gun or a breast. So I hate to bring it to that level, but I did finish the AFM.
No, the AFM ads alone in the trades are
Horrible.
Oh, they're
It's
poster art is just
so
incredible.
sobering.
You're like, what is this movie?
I urge all of you to either come to the American film market once, or at least pick up the Variety or Hollywood Reporter or Screen Bumper edition, which shows all the things that are being sold, and you're like, they're movies you have never heard of and will never hear of.
Yeah.
And so it's very interesting time. Also, kid stuff can travel, and horror often can travel. What doesn't travel is comedy, because because comedy is often so unique to its own territory. So, drama is very hit or miss as far as whether it will travel sometimes.
I was going to say, be careful about going to the AFM, because you may not want to be involved in the film business after going to AFM.
It can be dispiriting. Let's go back to the audience for questions. Yes, sir.
Magic 8-ball question. What trends do you see coming up or bubbling up that we should be following, whether it's filmmakers, content, story, platforms for telling those things, or what trends would you like to see coming once we're through this sort of adolescent superhero phase?
Well, we have discussed, and it keeps coming up again and again, the television is beginning to be, has become a much greater place where people can experiment with storytelling. And instead of telling a story in 90 minutes, they get to tell a story in 13 hours or something, or 8 hours or 6 hours or something like that. I am aggressively trying to embrace that. One of the things that I hope will be embraced is a more transparent model for income, for how to project income, and for how to determine income, and how to sort of review income from the video on demand world. Because when there were DVDs or God forbid VHSs, you could count the number you sold, you could count the number of times they were rented. Now, what Netflix generally does, especially with independent films, is they buy it for an advance, not that huge, and it depends, and you don't know whether that movie, only Reed Hastings knows, whether that film's been seen 1,000 times or 1,000,000 times. Yeah. And we need to know that, because it's like musicians and Spotify. Really?
And they're utilizing, and now they're starting to do this because with their original programming team on both the TV and the film side, which is going to start boosting up more so over the next year or so, is utilizing that data to help them in terms of producing their original content, which they have, but we don't have.
Right.
And it's
They've collected by all
from that they've
films,
collected
right.
by all of our films.
Right.
I mean, they literally, they won't speak on panels. They don't, because they don't want to put themselves into the position of having to share that information.
We must break into the gulag.
Yeah.
But I guess, I mean, and then just to, to say it, and not to sound too Pollyanna, but, the more things change, the more they stay the same. And from where I sit, if your story isn't great, if the people making it aren't good, and I mean, just make good stuff and it's going to get out there. That's sort of, and whether it has to be, whether it's meant to be a miniseries or a TV show or a feature, or it could be any one of those three things, if the story itself is really good and there's an interesting and fresh way of telling it, I really believe it'll find its way into the marketplace in the right way.
Jason reminded me that we have to talk about the distribution of this video later, so
This should not be put up.
we'll discuss it. Only the edited version that we approve.
Right.
Other questions? Let's go over here to you.
Oh.
You. Yes, you.
I talk loud. So, a strategy for film festivals, because right now the micro market, you said, was profitable. After AFM this year, I didn't hear anybody get an offer more than $25,000. They could have made the movie for $250,000. Nobody got offered more than $25,000.
For domestic rights? For
Foreign and domestic, so that between the Netflix deal, the VOD, just nothing. If you didn't have big names and spent, $3 million, just there were no offers. So now it's moving into the film festival, hoping to get a bigger audience. What kind of strategy? I know you did film festivals for Memento. Any ideas besides just trying to get into as many as possible?
Jason, you're doing a lot of these.
Right.
In terms of getting into film festivals for,
Well, there's all the film festivals. You have,
Right.
obviously, it's a horror, you try to do a horror film festival.
Right.
But if you have a limited budget on getting into film festivals, because it is expensive to apply and submit, what's a better strategy to use your money more effectively? Because if you're only making $100,000 to make a film, you obviously don't have $2 million to
Right.
market it and get it into film festivals.
right. Okay. I think you have to be obviously very selective about the film festivals that you're applying to, and also kind of know where maybe your film stands as well, and also take notice of the ones that you're getting accepted to, and then the ones that you're getting rejected to, so you're not applying to ones that you think you may not have a chance to get in. I remember doing that very early on and just applying to so many film festivals and racking up thousands of dollars on our credit cards by doing this. But then eventually, if you got into one big film festival, then you would start getting waivers and free invites to other film festivals, and that would be that would help a lot too. But in regards to you were connecting something also to foreign sales advances or advances at AFM. Something else that I'll say that's just a little bit off topic from what you were saying, but I think it's also important, is that there are tons of film festivals around the world. And I think what we're noticing as independent filmmakers is it's harder and harder for us to bring revenue back into our projects and pay our investors back. And I hope, and I think this may happen, and we'll see who does it first, but I wouldn't be surprised that if there's a film festival or a group of film festivals that start figuring out a way for ticket sales to films, being able to give a percentage of that back to filmmakers. And really what the other thing that I've noticed is that a lot of times these big film festivals, unfortunately, we used to hope that they were going to be the launching points for our films into a marketplace where we could also see additional revenue. Now it's almost like it's become much tougher to get our films distributed, that these film festivals are really sometimes, in a way, the final major stop for a film. And so if there's a way to kind of continue to grow that film festival network to where we're getting these films in more regional film festivals off of these major film festivals, and filmmakers are able to see a percentage of revenue of ticket sales from those film festivals, I think that's going to kind of help to stimulate still the creation of independent films. So it's going to be interesting to see if that actually happens over the next 5 years. And I think there's a chance that it could.
Revolutionary idea, I like it.
But I know that it's definitely been in conversation at some places.
I also, I don't know anything about the project, if you have one in mind in particular, but I've been thinking a lot about and wondering how sort of the college tour is working for certain films, because if you can't see the film any other way, then that's sort of alluring, I think. Most films, any college kid can figure out either how to pirate or pay for or watch on his iPhone, and there's only, some universities are small and they don't have a cinema, and these film clubs and film societies, I wonder what the economics of those are, because I've heard some filmmakers with films that are suitable to that demographic have done pretty well with extremely inexpensively made films.
More questions? Yes.
Hi there. As a producer and director, I'm about to go down the road of financing for my next project. And I've done the crowdfunding thing. I'm not a huge fan of it, so I have 2 questions for you guys. What advice would you have for getting proper financing, with the first kind of steps to go about finding private investors, number 1? And number 2 is, have you all ever been involved in co-productions, several different production companies working together, and what do you think about that?
Well, let me so we can answer the question better, what size movie are we talking about?
Size as far as budget?
Well, yeah. What would you like to have?
500,000.
Okay.
To $10 billion. What would I like? No. Realistically, $1 million.
Okay, and what's the genre?
Drama.
Okay, you just went from 500 to $1 million like that.
No, well,
Everyone here is going, she said 500 first.
No, I'll be honest. It's in the very early stages, but having you here, I wanted to get some advice there. So just in general.
Well, I mean, the first, as someone who's made this mistake before, I'd get under the hood of this thing and I'd crack that budget right out. And I'd really, really figure out, I'd schedule and budget and break that thing down. And, can you make it in 18 days? Can you make it in 24 days? Where are you going to make it? Get a proper budget. Get a proper budget so that you really know what you'd like to have, and then you can go through the exercise, which we've all done at this level and this level up here. What if I only get 3/4 of that? Can I still make the movie? Can I still make the movie that I want to make? So anyway, I just think that having a proper budget is one of the most important first things you can do.
Sure, and knowing what talent, because obviously the talent involved, or the actors, if you're going to direct it yourself, obviously the level of actor will determine, a lot of the budget, a lot of your ability to fundraise, right?
But sometimes, I completely agree. But I would also say that, the only difference between a $1 million movie with a $50,000 actor and a $1 million movie with a $2 million actor is their fee. Now, sometimes there's an entourage.
But I'm saying for your ability to fundraise becomes very different depending on what level actors you're talking about. So that it's harder for me to give fundraising advice, depending on that, because it really depends on what level you are. Obviously, he made a movie with Richard Gere, and it was sort of one level of financing. And it's funny, a few years ago, I made this independent film called Celeste and Jesse Forever. And in 2009, we walked into Fox Atomic, and I sold the movie to Debbie Liebling, who was the head of it, and it was the best meeting I ever had. I walked out and I said, she's like, I want to make that movie. We'll give you $20 million. We should make it with Rashida and, who did she want to make it with? Justin Timberlake. And we should make it, and we walked out, and I said to the writers of the film, that's the best meeting I've ever had. Like, I've been doing this forever. I can't believe it. And 2 days later, I was at lunch with a friend, and she said, where'd you end up selling your movie? And I said, Fox Atomic. She went, ooh. And by the end of the lunch, it was like Fox Atomic closes, on my my thing. I thought, fuck. So then we sold it to, I'll try to make this quick. Then we sold it to, or we set it up at a company called Overture. And they were going to give us $15 million. And we did get Justin Timberlake to star in the movie with Rashida. And I had just had a baby, and I took like a 2-week maternity leave to come back and get a director on the movie and get it all put together. Until I got that phone call that Overture was no longer in the film business, okay? So then I set it up at a company out of New York that was going to give me $6 million. But they wanted an actor who I couldn't get to make the movie, and Rashida had to go back to her TV show. So we lost the movie in that window. Then I set it up at a company called Nala, which was this Mexican film company that was going to give us $2.5 million.
The incredible shrinking movie.
But I'm not kidding. This is all, all pain and suffering. At $2.5 million, we were going to make the movie in LA at Tier 1, which in the union is, is a certain amount of rates. But unfortunately, at Tier 1, with all the, by the way, none of us were getting paid at this point, but all their fees they were putting into the budget of the movie, we would only have 16 days to shoot the movie, and they were not treating us well in the system. So we walk out of the movie, the building, and Rashida turns to me. She says, "Well, what do we do? Should I just pay for the movie myself? Like, do we just, I don't even know what to do at this point," because at this point we had her and Andy Samberg, and I had a short window. And thankfully, I made a couple of calls. I ended up finding a financier who gave us $860,000, and that's what we made the film for, and we festival finished it. So we actually needed some more money, but we took it to Sundance, and we sold it to Sony Classics, and then we put a couple $100,000 into actually like finishing the music and everything. And I tell you that story only to tell you that like obviously movies can be made at a variety of budgets. I would have loved to have made the $20 million version of it. I would have loved to have made the $15 million version of it. I made the $860 million version of it, but I still love the movie. It looks like you did too. So, oh, good. I'm glad. I'm still really proud of it. I'm more proud of the fact that we stuck with it and got it done. But so, anything can be done at any level. It just depends on like what's the most pain and suffering you're willing to handle, and that's what you'll end up making the movie for.
So I think that the answers to your question before we hop on to some other questions is that you need to know what you're going to make it for. You have to have a realistic vision for the talent level. Is it going to be people we know or people we don't know? Are they going to be big TV stars? Are they going to be movie? What is and what is your access to them, and how are you going to get to them, and who's the director, which is going to have a big impact, and what are you paying them? Obviously co-productions. It's great to partner with other people who are also bringing straight up equity to the table. It doesn't happen a lot. Usually one person has this kind of equity and one person got debt, and I think the other one's got some money for your grandmother, and it's so hard to find, here's my million, here's your million, fabulous, let's go. It's very hard to find that because everybody's got some bullshit story that they're trying to jack around with and say, well, if you give me your million, then I'll and put it in my account, then I'll come up with my 50, whatever. It's crazy.
Oh, I think I just turned this off. Yeah, we have spent, when we were putting together the Richard Gere movie, that was initially going to start out as a $1 million film, and then he got involved, and with what he wanted to be paid up front, it was going to end up being a $10 million film. And then I had to spend 8 weeks working through with his lawyer, setting up a structure on the movie so we could make it for, just under $5 million and be within a certain level of the union tiers, which is something else you have to keep in mind, is that at certain budget ranges with the Writers Guild, the Directors Guild, the Screen Actors Guild, and IATSE, which are all your, generally a lot of your below the line, and then your camera guild, your people that are in your cinematographers guild and your editors guild, depending on what you make the film for, their rates and the pension, health, and welfare can increase at different budget ranges. So there was really no version of the film that I just did between $5 million and $6.5 million. It was either going to go from $5 million to $6.5 million based upon how the rates were going to go up. So we literally had to spend, 8 to 12 weeks taking a budget from what we were originally going to do for $1 million with a less well-known name actor to $10 million based upon what he wanted to make and how all the rates went up, back down to $5 million, which was a way that we could finance the film and be able to cover our costs and be able to have a conservative number against the United States in terms of selling the domestic rights. So it's definitely a game of chess, and part of it is figuring out how to be as crafty as you can in stretching a dollar, which it seems like you guys did on Celeste and Jesse, which I also love.
I think we're getting near our 90 minutes. I think so. I think we should just take one or two more questions, and then we will mill around up here and come visit us afterwards for a couple of minutes. Yes.
I'm on now, yeah. I think my question just goes straight into the next thing, specifically on low-budget films, where basically I produced, and I told everyone they just aren't going to make back their money, just invest into it because they love the art form. I mean, where do you make a profit in a low-budget film?
Well, I admire your chutzpah to tell people just to invest for the art of it, and I Lord knows I have leaned on that part of the argument myself. But it's hard to make a living making low-budget movies. That's a recurring theme that we've, on other things we've discussed while we've been here this week. When people are making a $500,000 movie, the only people getting a semi-livable wage usually are the actors, maybe, and the crew. But Lord knows the director generally isn't, and the producers certainly aren't, and the writer probably isn't. And everybody's doing it for the credit and the calling card that it will be moving forward. So the business model, it's not a business model, it's a business Hail Mary. And it's a prayer that you're one of the 5 films a year that sells for a lot of money. Let Jason give you
let me just give you a little insight into me. I'm 32, I've been an independent film producer for 5 years. I made 4 films this past year. I probably made on average what I would say a creative exec, but with the fees that I was able to bring in on those movies, what a creative executive or maybe a lower level, mid-level agent at an agency was able to bring in salary-wise. I operate with no assistant. And in terms of being an independent film producer, I am responsible for closing the financing, working day-to-day with a lawyer, closing the actor contracts, overseeing the line producer, dealing with the talent, dealing with all of post-production, everything that's included in that, and delivering a film. That can go on for 2 years. And you have to at least make, hopefully, in the budget ranges that I've been doing, 3 to 4 movies a year to be able to sustain the lifestyle that I want to live. I'm doing all of this without an assistant. There are creative executives and junior level agents at agencies that have assistants, and they don't do nearly as much as I do. So I'm working 18 hours a day. I just want to paint a picture of what you have to do as an independent producer. When I got back after this past summer, I knew that I needed to go. I could not exist the way that I did over the last 2 years. I needed to go find a job, thus going and becoming a producer on staff at Mandalay, where I was going to get an overhead and going to get an assistant. So doing this is not easy. And doing it as an independent producer is not easy because you have to be able to sustain yourself, and you're not making big fees on these movies. Studio producers can make upwards of $500,000 on average on a studio film. On the independent film, you're making generally less than $100,000, and you give a good portion of that away to taxes. And it's hard to, in this day and age, you really have to hit it out of the park to be able to see money on the net profit side. So it is tough. It is a tough business, and you've got to be it's got to be the only thing you can see yourself doing when you wake up in the morning. Otherwise,
but I also think you can be smart about it.
Yeah,
too.
you can be smart about it. But the fees aren't huge on these independent films. They just aren't. Even on $3 to $5 million budget films, they're not. And then the other issue you get yourself into as an independent producer when you're producing movies of this size is that the agents have to protect their talent and the actors and the writers and directors. And so they're kind of curious about what you as a producer are building yourself into the budget for. Even if you're involved the entire way through, and keep in mind on independent films, you don't have a back office infrastructure. You're dealing with the entire part of it. So it's maybe a 2 to 3 year commitment from the time of pre-production through delivery and overseeing marketing. But they're curious, what are you making? Because they want to make sure that their actor or their writer-director is in somewhat of the ballpark as you are. And so sometimes I've even had lawyers try to push my fees down because they're curious and you're trying to get a movie made with paying an actor a certain price and paying your writer and director a certain fee to be able to make it work. So the producers get squished on a lot. I think Pam will probably.
just listening.
I mean, she knows this all too well.
Sounds very
And they are the
familiar.
most successful in this business, in our world, in terms of the amount of films that they've done.
And
So
I
it's-
think Jennifer will attest to the fact that I mean, look, some studio films you are very, a lot of responsibility. But
No, it's strange, though. I always said that. I was lucky enough, we just made a sequel to Alice in Wonderland that just finished shooting in London. And, I was there, and the infrastructure on a movie like that at the budget level is just enormous. And there's someone, the amount of people doing the job.
you get paid more to do less. It's
Right,
fantastic.
and you do, because the budget can withstand that. And then on an independent film, you literally do everything. You're the casting director. You do. I mean, I did just see literally like some overdue music bill, something on Celeste and Jesse. Literally went through my emails for 2 days ago. It never
It's
ends.
like an
I'm like,
STD. It
who
does
did
not
get
go
paid?
away.
On something like
It's
literally the
unbelievable.
Independent films, you're the first one in and you're the last one out, and it's amazing how many people's jobs you do on them. But I do think there's a beauty in those movies. I feel of the ones that I've made, I feel. I feel like I take a big part in their creativity and their success. And sometimes when you are on some of the bigger studio films, which are fun, there's 700 special effects guys working on the movie too, and you don't necessarily feel, you can't kind of feel the ownership that you do. It's almost like child rearing. Like the more you put in, the more you get out. And you do really, I mean, that's what I do take in my Pollyanna way of like, I do really like, I love some of the smaller films are some of my favorite films I've gotten to make.
All these Pollyannas up here.
Well, you have to, otherwise we're just gonna drink ourselves to.
I think what we should do, since we're near the end, near the end, and we will hang out for just a couple minutes, but maybe I could have everybody sort of, give a hopeful parting thought.
Everything everyone said is true. It's a really, really hard business. It sometimes doesn't feel like a business doing independent film. But, you don't have to do it, right? And I think that if you do it, and you should feel lucky to work. You work with really creative people. You get to make something in an economy that doesn't really value making things anymore, but it's there forever. You connect with people. You tell stories that maybe change the way they see the world in a positive way. I think it's a privilege, and it is. There's no question. It's super tough, but if you can make it work, I think it's an incredibly fulfilling use of time, energy, and intelligence.
Jason, something hopeful?
Yeah, I mean, I will say that it's the collaborative part of putting these films together and working with like-minded and creative and passionate people is something that that I would say by operating in the independent film space, I'm able to do pretty much every day. And so even with all the heartache and the headaches that you deal with, working with really creative and passionate people that are just so persistent and have to persevere and are just so passionate about the art that they're creating or the stories that they're telling makes it all rewarding. And I think the other really great part about it, too, is that as a film producer, and with the different films that I've done and the different subject matters that I've been involved in and the different places around the country and around the world that I've gotten to shoot, I've been able to build some really great relationships with people in the U.S. government and in the military, in the coal mining industry, in the ports of in a port down in Gioia in Italy, and these are people that stay lifelong friends for a very, very long time, and so you get to know a lot of people and you get to learn constantly about other environments, other parts of the world, other communities, and cultures, and it's and because of that, you're constantly always learning, and that's, I would say, the best part about it.
Jennifer, something hopeful?
Something else. I agree. I do think that great art gets discovered at no matter what level you make it. And I think you should make movies that you feel incredibly passionate about, that you think are ready to, that you don't make until you feel they're ready. And I think that if you feel like you can't live without making this story and you can go do it about the best way you can, then I think it will be found no matter what. I think no matter how hard it is for all of us, I do think that the cream rises to the top, and I do think that the really great stuff is still seen and discovered and loved.
And my hopeful comment is, I think you all, especially in the very early stages of getting films made in the beginning of your career, I think we're all producers. I don't think, if you just think you can write stuff and think it'll get found and bought and made, if you're a director and you're waiting for somebody to come to you with an assignment, You know, every director I know on a first-time feature basically has been a producer as well. And you've got to, there's no one's waiting for you. You have to go to it. And so I would encourage you to consider, you know, in the discussion of co-productions or partnering. I don't think you have to live in LA to make movies, or you don't have to live in New York to make movies. I think you need to understand how the decision makers in LA think to some extent. You just have to appreciate, you know, you have to play in their sandbox a little bit. You need their actors, you need their talent, you need their distribution. You know, it's all centered in New York and LA until it's not, and it is for now. So I think it's wise to really consider potential partners and who's made stuff that you really like, that you have a shot at getting to, who's made stuff that's like-minded to what you have in mind to do. You know, think about who your audience is going to be. And I agree. I have had a great time doing it. I've loved putting on a show since I was in college. I like putting on a show, and that's why I get up every day. Thank you very much.
Thank you.